We were all so cold, and our hands were numb. It probably fell through the crack without him noticing. Edith handed her the ring, watching as Ruby slipped it onto her thumb for safekeeping. Something about the explanation didn't sit right, but Edith couldn't articulate what exactly bothered her. She glanced around the cabin again, noting details she had missed before. Edith said slowly, "If this cabin is abandoned, why is there so much firewood? And those supplies, some of them look new." A flicker of something, alarm, guilt, crossed Ruby's face before she composed herself. "I told you, I think someone uses it regularly. Maybe they've been by since we've been here and they didn't see you. Didn't offer help. We hide when we hear anyone approaching," Ruby explained. "After everything that's happened, I didn't know who to trust." Edith nodded, but the explanation did little to settle the unease growing within her. She turned back toward the kitchen area, intending to ask more questions when a sudden movement caught her peripheral vision. In the split second before pain exploded across the back of her head, Edith saw Ruby behind her, arms raised high, the butt of a hunting shotgun clutched in her hands. Then darkness claimed her. Consciousness returned to Edith in painful fragments. First came the throbbing in her head, a steady pulse of agony that radiated from the base of her skull. Then the awareness of cold. Her extremities felt numb despite the cabin's interior. Finally, the smell, something acrid and chemical that made her throat constrict. She forced her eyes open, blinking against the disorientation. The cabin was dark now, the fire reduced to embers that cast long shadows across the walls. Through the windows, she could see that the snowstorm had passed, leaving a clear night sky beyond the glass. When she tried to move, panic surged through her. Her arms and legs wouldn't respond. Looking down, she discovered why. She was bound to a wooden chair with rope, the bindings tight enough to cut into her skin. The smell grew stronger, making her cough. Gas! There was gas leaking in the cabin. Edith's gaze darted around the room, searching for Ruby and the twins. The small bed in the corner was empty, the blankets thrown aside. No one else was in the cabin. The realization hit her with brutal clarity. Ruby had left her tied up in a cabin filled with gas with a smoldering fire that would eventually catch and trigger an explosion. She meant for Edith to die here. But why? The question burned as fiercely as the pain in her head, but Edith knew she couldn't dwell on it now. Survival came first. She took stock of her situation. The ropes around her wrists were tight, but not expertly tied. If she could create enough slack, she might be able to work her way free. The chair itself was old, but sturdy, not easily broken. Edith began rocking the chair. Small movements at first, testing its stability. Each motion sent fresh waves of pain through her head, but she pushed through it. The gas smell was getting stronger by the minute. She didn't have the luxury of time. With a sudden lurch, she threw her weight sideways, toppling the chair onto its side. The impact jarred her injured head, sending stars across her vision, but she felt the chair crack slightly. Encouraged, she repeated the motion, slamming the chair against the floor again and again until one of the legs splintered. The broken leg created just enough give in the structure that Edith could maneuver her bound hands toward her pocket. Her fingers, stiff with cold and restricted circulation, fumbled for several agonizing seconds before closing around what she sought. A small folding knife she always carried. Opening it one-handed while bound was a challenge that required every bit of dexterity she possessed. When the blade finally clicked into place, she began sawing at the ropes around her wrists, careful not to cut herself in the process. The gas smell was now overwhelming, making her head swim. Somewhere in the cabin, a small flame from the dying embers caught something. There was a soft whoosh as fire bloomed near the fireplace area. The rope around one wrist gave way just as the first flames began racing across the wooden floor toward the kitchen area. Edith worked faster, freeing her other wrist and then quickly untying her ankles. Standing made her dizzy, but adrenaline propelled her forward. She stumbled to the door only to find it locked. Whether with a key or by some external means, she couldn't tell. The fire was spreading rapidly now, consuming the aged wood with hungry efficiency. Grabbing one of the remaining firewood logs, Edith approached the nearest window. The glass was old and single-paned, vulnerable, especially to a woman who had spent decades developing the physical strength required for wilderness survival. With a grunt of effort, she swung the log against the window. The glass cracked but held. A second blow shattered it, sending shards flying outward into the snow. Edith used the log to clear the remaining glass from the frame, ignoring the cuts that opened on her hands as she worked behind her. Edith didn't hesitate. She climbed through the window, the sharp edges of broken glass catching on her clothing and cutting into her leg as she maneuvered through the tight space. She fell heavily into the snow outside, the cold a shocking contrast to the inferno behind her. Rolling away from the cabin, she watched as flames engulfed the structure. The warm glow that had seemed so welcoming hours ago now revealed itself as the deadly trap it had become. Her supplies, her GPS, her pack, her means of communication and navigation, all of it was burning inside. She was alone in the wilderness without equipment, injured and with no clear sense of her location relative to the lodge, but she was alive. And somewhere out there, Ruby was on the run with the twins, children who belonged to Edith's son, Trent, the very man Ruby had almost certainly killed. Edith couldn't ignore that truth. If Trent's death had truly been an accident, then why had Ruby tried to kill her, too, when she started asking too many questions? Edith staggered to her feet, wincing at the pain that shot through her leg, where the glass had cut her. The night was clear now, the stars brilliantly visible above the tree. She oriented herself using the North Star, recalling that the lodge lay to the west of the cabin. But before she could take a step in that direction, a faint sound caught her attention. A child's voice, high and frightened, calling out from somewhere in the forest. Forgetting her own injuries, Edith moved toward the sound, her feet sinking into the deep snow. The voice came again, clearer this time, unmistakably one of the twins. She pushed through a stand of pine trees, following the cries, until she emerged into a small clearing. There, against a rock outcropping, a small figure in a purple jacket was huddled, one leg extended at an unnatural angle. "Yana," Edith called softly, approaching slowly so as not to frighten the child further. The girl looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Grandma Ellie, it hurts. My leg really hurts." Edith crouched beside her granddaughter, carefully examining the injury. Even in the dim starlight, she could see that Yana's leg was either broken or severely sprained. The ankle was swollen to twice its normal size. "What happened, sweetheart?" Edith asked, removing her scarf to create a makeshift splint. "Where's your mom?" "Indiana." Yana sniffled. "I fell down the hill. Mom tried to help me, but then she said we had to keep going. She said," the child's voice broke. "She said something about sacrifice. And then she took Iana and left me here." Rage unlike anything Edith had ever experienced flooded through her. Ruby had abandoned an injured child in the wilderness, her own daughter, in freezing temperatures that would have killed her before morning. "I'm here now," Edith said, working to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe." Hours passed this way, marked only by the slow movement of stars across the sky. As the eastern horizon began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Edith caught glimpses of familiar landmarks. They were approaching the maintained trails that would lead back to the lodge. "Yana," she said softly, rousing the child. "Look, sweetie, we're almost there." The girl stirred, blinking groggy at their surroundings. Her face was pale with pain and cold, but a flicker of hope appeared in her eyes when she saw the trail markers ahead. "Is Mom there?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. The question caught Edith off guard. How could she explain to a 7-year-old that her mother had tried to kill them both, that she had abandoned Run to die in the snow? "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "But there are people who can help us, and that's what matters right now." The final stretch of their journey took them past the outlying cabins and toward the central lodge. As they emerged from the tree-in, Edith could see early morning hikers preparing for their day, staff members setting up equipment. Summoning her last reserves of strength, she called out, "Help! We need help here." Heads turned. There was a moment of shocked stillness before people began running toward them. Edith's legs finally gave out, and she sank to her knees in the snow, still cradling Iana protectively. "Get medical assistance," someone shouted, "and call the manager." Hands reached for them, helping Edith to her feet, others carefully taking Iana from her arms. The warmth of the lodge's foyer enveloped them as they were guided inside, voices overlapping in concern and confusion. "It's Meredith Smith," she heard someone say, "and one of the missing children." The lodge manager appeared, his face registering shock as he recognized her. "Miss Smith, what happened? How did you call the police?" Edith interrupted, her voice with exhaustion. "Ruby tried to kill me. She left Iana injured in the snow to die." A hushed silence fell over the gathered crowd. Some had begun recording the scene on their phones, but Edith was beyond caring about privacy now. "We need to warm them up," the manager said, recovering his composure. "Miss Smith," the manager said, crouching beside her. The gondola operators reported seeing a woman with a child early this morning. They weren't certain, but they thought it might have been Ruby. Edith finished for him with Ivy. Which way were they heading? Down the mountain. Apparently, they moved quickly, didn't stop to talk to anyone. Ellie's heart sank. If Ruby had already made it down the gondola, she could be anywhere by now. The wail of sirens announced the arrival of emergency services. Within minutes, the lodge was filled with police officers and paramedics. Iana was carefully transferred to a stretcher, paramedics stabilizing her leg and checking her vital signs. "I want to stay with my granddaughter," Edith insisted as they prepared to move Iana off course. One of the paramedics assured her. "We'll transport you both to the hospital." As they were being loaded into the medical helicopter, the quickest way to reach the nearest hospital, a police officer approached. "Miss Smith, we need to take a statement from you as soon as possible. We've already received conflicting information." "What do you mean?" Edith asked, not releasing her hold on Iana's hand. "A woman identifying herself as Ruby was brought to the hospital earlier by a hunter who found her and a child at the park's main entrance. She's made some serious allegations against you." Edith stared at the officer in disbelief. "What kind of allegations?" "She claims you tracked them to a cabin where they'd been sheltering after her husband's disappearance. According to her statement, when you learned Trent was presumed dead, you became enraged and attempted to harm her and the children." "That's absurd," Edith said, anger giving her renewed energy. "She knocked me unconscious and left me to die in a cabin filling with gas. She abandoned Ron with a broken leg in freezing temperatures." The officer nodded, making notes. "We'll need formal statements from both of you and from the child when she's able." "Her name is Iana," Edith said firmly, "and she needs medical attention more than you need her statement right now." "Of course. We'll meet you at the hospital." The officer stepped back as the helicopter crew secured the doors. As the helicopter lifted off, Edith held tight to Iana's hand, watching the mountain landscape fall away beneath them. In just hours, she had found her family, lost her son all over again, and nearly died at the hands of the woman he had married. And now, that same woman was attempting to twist the narrative to paint Edith as the villain. The thought of Ruby holding Ivy, potentially poisoning the child's mind against her own grandmother and twin sister, made Edith's blood boil. The paramedic monitoring Iana glanced at Edith with concern. "Ma'am, I need to check your injuries, too. You have lacerations that need cleaning and possible concussion from the blow to your head." Edith nodded absently, allowing the medic to examine the wound at the back of her skull. During that time, more officers had arrived, and the atmosphere had grown increasingly tense. The elevator doors opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. Clark, the hunter, who had shown her the camera footage. His expression was grave as he approached, nodding respectfully to the officer before addressing Edith Hell. "Miss Smith, I heard what happened up on the mountain. I'm glad you're safe." "Clark," Edith studied his face, trying to read his intentions. "Thank you for coming, but I'm surprised to see you here." He glanced at the officer, then back to Edith. "I need to talk to you and to the police. There's something I have to tell you both." Before she could respond, the door to the radiology department opened, and a doctor emerged with a tablet in hand. "Miss Whitaker, your granddaughter's x-rays show a clean break to the tibia." She'll need surgery to properly set the bone and place pins to hold it in position while it heals. When can you do the procedure? Edith asked, rising from her seat. We're preparing an operating room now. We'll need consent form signed, and then we can proceed. Edith nodded. I want to see her first. The doctor guided her back into the department where Iana lay on a gurney, her leg immobilized and in four in her arm. The girl's face brightened slightly when she saw her grandmother. The doctors say they're going to fix my leg, she said, her voice small but brave. That's right, Edith confirmed, moving to her side and taking her hand. They're going to put you to sleep so you won't feel anything. And when you wake up, your leg will be in a cast, but it will be on the right path to healing. Will Mom sign the papers? They said they need a parent. Edith hesitated, unsure how to answer. After completing the necessary paperwork and promising Iana she would be there when she woke up, Edith returned to the hallway where Cal and the officer were waiting. We should talk somewhere private, Cal suggested. The officer led them to a small consultation room where two other police officers were already waiting. Once the door closed behind them, Cal took a deep breath. First, I want to say how sorry I am for everything that's happened. He began, what I have to tell you. It's not easy. Edith steeled herself. Just tell us the truth, Clark, he nodded grimly. 4 weeks ago, I found Ruby, Trent, and the twins already in my cabin. They had stayed the night after getting caught in the storm. Trent explained they had ventured into that area and couldn't make it back safely when the weather turned. Your cabin, Edith interrupted. That's your hunting cabin? Yes, I've had it for years. It's not on any official maps. Built it myself on a remote parcel. Clark continued. I let them stay because the girls were exhausted and frightened. Trent promised they'd leave once things improved, and the girls felt better. Cal paused, visibly struggling with his next words. I left them there for privacy, intending to return to the lodge myself, but the weather worsened. A hailstorm moved in. I was halfway back when I heard screaming children's voices. The room had gone completely still, all eyes fixed on Clark as he forced himself to continue. I followed the sounds and saw Ruby push Trent off a cliff edge. He fell to his death. The twins were nearby, hiding behind trees. Ruby kept telling them to stay where they were. Edith's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled sound escaping her throat. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was devastating. Why didn't you report this immediately? One of the officers demanded. Clark's shoulders slumped. Ruby saw me watching. I wanted to confront her, but with the weather and the unstable cliff, I was afraid for my own safety and for the children. So, we went back to the cabin, and that's when she made me an offer. If I let her and the kids stay hidden in my cabin until someone naturally found them, she'd pay me enough to retire and disappear. Said she'd get the money from Trent S Life Insurance. He couldn't meet Edith's gaze as he continued. I'm ashamed to admit I considered it, even agreed to it initially. For 8 weeks, I brought them supplies, food, firewood, whatever they needed. $2 million, Edith said quietly. That was Trent S Life Insurance policy. Ruby is the primary beneficiary, but only if Trent died while they were still legally married with no criminal charges or proven intent. Clark nodded. Ruby said her husband had recently consulted a lawyer about changing his will, creating trust funds for the twins in case of his death or divorce. But the paperwork wasn't finalized yet. One of the officers leaned forward. So what changed? Why are you coming forward now? Why did you help Mrs. Whitaker? Several things, Cal answered. Seeing those missing person posters everywhere, watching how the girls grieve their father, it wore on my conscience. But what really decided it was overhearing Ruby on the phone with her lawyer. She was planning to implicate me in Trent's death to avoid sharing the money. That's when I knew I couldn't be part of this anymore. He turned to Ellie, genuine remorse in his expression. I'm sorry I didn't lead you directly to them when you showed me that poster. I was scared and selfish. But when I saw Ruby and only one child leaving the mountain this morning, I knew something was terribly wrong. That's when I called the police. Edith stared at him, a complex mix of emotions churning within her. Gratitude that he had ultimately helped save Run. Fury that he had protected Ruby for so long. Disgusted at his willingness to profit from her son's murder. She killed my son, Edith said, her voice barely above a whisper. And you helped her cover it up. I know, Cal acknowledged, and I'll accept whatever punishment comes my way. I just couldn't live with myself anymore. One of the officers stood. Mr. Clark, we're placing you under arrest as an accessory after the fact to homicide. You have the right to remain silent. As the officer continued reading Clark's rights, Edith tried to process everything she had learned. Trent hadn't died in a tragic accident trying to save his family. He had been murdered by his wife in cold blood with his children nearby as witnesses. The officers handcuffed Clark and prepared to lead him out. Before they did, he turned back to Edith one last time. For what it's worth, Miss Smith, I truly am sorry. Without me coming forward, you might never have found your granddaughter. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Edith raised her hand for a moment, looking as though she might strike him, but then her arm dropped back to her side. You're right about one thing. Without you, I might never have found Iana and Niana. For that, I thank you. But forgiveness, that's something I can't offer right now. After Clark was led away, the remaining officer explained the next steps to Edith. We're moving to arrest M. Ruby Smith now. With Mr. Clark's testimony and what we expect to learn from the children, we have enough to charge her with first-degree murder and attempted murder. What about Iana? Edith asked. Where is she now? She's in a secure room with a child advocate. Ruby has been kept separate since we became aware of the conflicting accounts. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in, looking directly at Edith. Miss Smith, your granddaughter is out of surgery. Everything went well, and she's in recovery now. You can see her soon. Thank you, Edith said, relief evident in her voice. At least one thing was going right today. The officer stood. I need to join my colleagues. We'll go to Ruby's room now to formally arrest her and read her rights. Would you like to be present? Edith considered for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I need to look her in the eye. They walked together down the corridor to another wing of the hospital. Outside a room guarded by an unformed officer, several police officials were gathered, speaking in low tones. They acknowledged Edith with respectful nods as she and the officer approached. We're ready, the lead detective said. Miss Smith, you can observe, but please allow us to handle this officially. Edith agreed, and they entered the room. Ruby lay in a hospital bed, and 4 in her arm, and monitors tracking her vital signs. Her expression hardened when she saw Edith. Ruby Smith, the detective began formally. You are under arrest for the murder of Trent Smith and the attempted murder of Meredith Smith and Iana Smith. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective continued reading Ruby her rights, Edith watched the woman who had killed her son. Ruby's face remained impassive until the detective mentioned Clark's testimony. He's lying, Ruby spat. Clark was the one who... Save it for your lawyer, the detective interrupted, continuing with the Miranda rights. When he finished, Edith stepped forward. Why, Ruby? Trent was a good husband to you. Ruby's expression twisted with bitterness. Good. Is that what you think? We have been arguing for months after I caught him cheating on me with some woman from his office. Trent would never cheat, Edith said firmly. That's not who he was. I saw him meeting up with women multiple times. Ruby insisted with that friend of his always the same excuse about networking and business meetings. And then he started talking about changing our prenuptial agreement. He was planning to leave me for someone else. Edith shook her head. You don't know the full story. You just assumed the worst and acted on it. The forest trip was supposed to fix things. Ruby continued as if Edith hadn't spoken. A way for us to reconnect as a family, but he kept denying everything, refusing to cut ties with that friend. I just snapped. So you push him off a cliff? Edith asked incredulously. With your daughters nearby? They weren't supposed to follow us outside, Ruby said defensively. I told them to stay in the cabin. One of the officers placed handcuffs on Ruby's wrists, securing them to the bed rail. Miss Whitaker, you'll remain in custody here until you're medically cleared for transport to the detention center. Ruby glared at Edith. This isn't over. It was over the moment you decided to murder my son, Edith replied coldly. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and you'll never see those girls again. Leaving Ruby under guard, Edith made her way back to the recovery area where Iana was beginning to wake from anesthesia. The child's leg was encased in a cast from foot to mid-thigh, elevated slightly on a pillow. Grandma Edith, Anna murmured groggily as Edith took a seat beside her bed. I'm here, sweetheart, Edith assured her, gently, taking her hand. The surgery went perfectly. You're going to be just fine. Where's Niana? The girl asked, looking around blurrily. She's here in the hospital, too. You'll see her soon. I promise. Later that evening, after Iana had been moved to a regular room and fallen into a deep medication-assisted sleep, Edith was granted permission to visit Niana. The child was in a room down the hall, a social worker sitting quietly in the corner. Niana looked up as Edith entered, her eyes wide and uncertain. She resembled her sister so closely, yet the experiences of the past weeks had marked her differently, a weariness in her gaze that no 7-year-old should possess. Hi, Niana, Edith said softly, approaching slowly. Grandma Edith, the girl's voice trembled. Where's Mom? Where's Iana? Edith sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd the child. Iana is in another room resting. Her leg was hurt, but the doctors fixed it. She's going to be okay. And Mom, your mom is with some people who are trying to understand what happened on the forest, Edith said carefully. For now, you and Iana are going to stay with me. Niana's lower lip quivered. Daddy's not coming back, is he? Mom said he had an accident. Edith felt her heart breaking all over again. No, sweetheart. Daddy isn't coming back, but he loved you and Iana very, very much. And I'm going to make sure you always remember that. Tears welled in Niana's eyes. Without warning, she launched herself into Edith's arms, sobs racking her small frame. Edith held her tightly, her own tears falling as she rocked her granddaughter. As Niana's sobs gradually subsided into hiccups and then the even breathing of exhausted sleep, Edith continued to hold her, thinking of all that had happened and all that lay ahead. She had lost her son, a wound that would never fully heal. But his daughters remained, precious links to the man she had raised and loved. They would need her strength now more than ever, and she was determined to provide it. Justice for Trent would come through the courts. Ruby would face trial for her crimes, and Clark would answer for his role in concealing the truth. But the true justice Edith believed would come in ensuring that Iana and Niana grew up knowing they were loved and protected. That despite the terrible actions of one parent, they were not defined by that legacy. Edith made a silent promise to her son. She would care for his daughters with every ounce of love and wisdom she possessed. She would help them navigate the difficult truths of their past while building a future filled with healing and hope. Edith had never shied away from challenging trails. She had spent a lifetime preparing for difficult journeys. And this, perhaps the most important one of all, would be faced with the same resilience and determination that had guided her through the mountains for more than 3 decades.